This episode of Skirmish Supremacy is brought to you by Reformation Brewery, the official beer of your game night. All right, folks, welcome back to episode 118 of Skirmish Supremacy. Nick is not able to join us tonight. He's actually up in New York doing some of his important work for his company. So it is going to be just myself, and I am joined by Cory from the Witchborn. He has come back to talk on this episode. Cory, how you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing great. Sorry
Awesome.
we missed Nick, but, I'll try my best to fill in for him.
So tonight we decided, we were talking a little bit on the phone earlier today, and we decided that, over the course of the last couple episodes, and, now that people are starting to see more of the Witchborn from, Gaming with the Cooler and Guerrilla Miniatures games and things like that, there's been a lot of talks about, how to develop games that have a level up mechanic similar to an RPG. Cory obviously has it with the Witchborn, and I have it with Ragnarok. And we touched on it a little bit this last week when we had Benson on, which actually that episode should be airing on Thursday, the 28th. So we're recording this on the 27th. And if it's past that, well, then you'll have already listened to that episode, and I'm just rambling on like an idiot right now. However, we decided to have a talk, like I was saying, about how we each deal with level up mechanics in wargaming that also has like a hybrid RPG feel. So we each have our own kind of different ways of doing it. And this one, I really want it to be more of a discussion and feedback from the community. So as you're listening to this, if you want to write into the Skirmish Supremacy page or anything else and kind of throw your feedback in or throw your comments in, it's all greatly appreciated because we'd love to hear from you. So, Cory, I guess we could probably start this thing off by kind of talking a little bit about how we kind of reached the concepts we did. Now, obviously, we know how you came up with the Witchborn, but how did your process start? Day one from trying to come up with the level up system.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? My background is role-playing games. And in the days when I played D&D, you didn't even really get anything when you leveled, right? You're a fighter, you fight a little better, and you get some hit points. Woohoo,
Right. Skills were
But my honest inspiration was when Gary Gygax wrote Oriental Adventures. That would have been in the 90s. I was like, oh, wait, this is cool. My guys can get stuff when they level now. And I actually wrote an article for it was Dragon Magazine at the time, Dragon Magazine, where I kind of brought the Oriental Adventures mechanic to D&D. And that's kind of the core of of what I've built the Witchborn from. It was just, it's not about getting hit points or something like that when you level up. It is really, I want to specialize in some kind of skill that is going to make this character unique. And I always talk about squads on Warclans. I need healers. I need guys who are going to make me money. I need guys who can fight better. I need guys who can shoot better, And that was kind of the core concept. And I just started coming up with hundreds of skills and then kind of narrowing them down to ones that I thought would work or were distinctive enough to, stand out as a skill. These two overlap. They're not really different. Let's make them into one.
Right. Okay, cool. So you started off by making a massive list of skills and started kind of cutting it down.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
And then there's really, there's a lot to it, right? I mean, just because I have a bunch of skills, it doesn't mean that they work. And,
yes.
And so I think the thing that is unique about Ragnarok and the thing that's unique about the Witchborn is we don't have a game master in most situations. We don't have somebody there. So there's like this extra level of difficulty in crafting the perfect skill because it has to work without somebody there to be the arbitrator. It has to be so clear that, Gash adds +2 to your damage feats when you are attacking with a longsword,
Right, exactly.
A little more detailed than a skill for, say, D&D, where it's like, okay, well, you've got a DM there who's going to tell you, no, I don't think that's the intent of the rule. This is the way we're going to play it. It has to be crystal clear, cut and dried. This is the way it works.
Right. Or on the flip side of that, like in Dungeons and Dragons or more your traditional role-playing games, you might say, oh, I could use my acrobatics in combat. Where it's like, if you think about it, it's two totally different skills in Dungeons and Dragons, but the GM might be like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to allow it. Where it's like, especially in a game that doesn't have a game master, everything has to be very well defined. This is what this skill does. No more, no less.
Yeah. And I always tell my players, I always call the people who like to twist the rules lawyers. And I always tell my rules lawyers, if you have to add words to a description or subtract words from a description, you are fundamentally changing it, and that is not the intent of the rule.
Right. Exactly. So everything has to be spelled to the letter. Now, there's a lot of times, even when I was writing skills for Ragnarok, and keep in mind, Ragnarok does not have a lot in the way of skills. It has more in the way of special abilities, because I kind of started stating it to people a little bit more simply when I was at Adepticon that were playing it, is that Ragnarok is very much a superhero game disguised as a Viking game in heavy metal, like apocalypse. So
that makes it so cool.
So for me, a lot of it was like, okay, if you were going to improve how you fight, how you use this particular power, how this particular power is used, it all had to be very clearly spelled out. It couldn't be like, the lightning of Thor, like you shoot lightning. Right. Well, no, I had to spell it out far much more than that, just to be able to say, it's like, no, in this particular way is how the lightning is used, or, things of that nature, to where, even like Thrud's power of stand aside, where it's basically, you think of it as like a Hulk punch that sends things flying, right? I had to spell it out very clearly about how it works, how the models like move when they're hit, and what happens, with everything else in between. So it all had to be very, very, very much laid out, where it's like, if you look at it from a traditional role-playing standpoint, that skill would be probably about a paragraph less, for sure. Because of the fact that, at that point, the GM could say, you know what, I'm going to allow that.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that you see, like in the way you've written your rules, is you kind of lay down the basic way that all these skills and God spark powers and all that kind of stuff are going to work. And then your skills just build on top of the basics.
Yes, correct. That was a rough part in the beginning. And then once I kind of built the algorithm for that in order to allow it to where, okay, this model can actually improve how well it fights with daggers. It can improve how well that its skill at range combat is better. Its toughness gets better. It's, increasing a god power works better, So there was all of these things that were able to, just by coming up with that algorithm, allowed it to become much easier to build upon. However, where mine was much more about like, okay, let's talk about how to increase the attributes of the war clan. It was also a matter of, okay, let's also talk about how to improve their god powers. Where with the Witchborn, you actually have it, in my opinion, way, way, way harder because you're like, okay, I leveled up. Now I get to roll on this chart and I've got like 120 skills to pick from.
Yeah. I love torturing people. That's what I always say is, it's, I make it tough, but I think that's part of the reason people enjoy it. It's like they don't feel trapped. They don't feel like they're following this very linear path. It's like, I want to be a thief. And then next level, they're like, thief wasn't so great. I want to be a great shooter, And,
yeah.
And you can take a different path and take turns because, boy, that was one of the things I always hated about role-playing was when you had that character class, unless you got a split class character, you were kind of stuck, You couldn't go off and try other things. So,
yeah, and I think that's why, like, for me in the role-playing aspect of it, like, I feel like I kind of graduated from Dungeons and Dragons into the world of darkness, and a lot of people look at it and they kind of roll their eyes and they think of vampire and werewolf and the games like that. But I think for me, the way that it changed is that the game itself became very much more like it was a non-linear progression of how things went. Like one of the things that after a while stopped making sense to me with games like Dungeons and Dragons, and for those of you listening out there, I am in no way saying that Dungeons and Dragons is terrible or anything like that. It's just
most important game ever invented.
Yeah, most important game ever invented. Like most of us would not be doing what we're doing without it. But for one of the things that was always a disconnect for me was the idea that like I can kill 5 orcs and for some reason I can now read the Elvish language. And so it was like that linear level progression where it didn't
quite make sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I kill stuff, therefore I am a better accountant.
Right.
And I learned a new language. And by the way, I'm still good with the sword. And that was the thing I kind of liked about like more of the attribute, like the attribute, and I guess you want to call it like non-linear progression process of like the World of Darkness and other, I guess you want to call them more skill-based. And by skill-based, I mean, you're not just like, when you level up, you don't just gain a bunch of stuff. It's like you spend your experience in very particular ways to improve skills or improve attributes. That to me was much more.
Now I can have a henchman. It's like,
yes.
Why could I not have a henchman at 9th level?
Right. You tell me that I wasn't rich enough to buy this guy for 3 silver.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, for me, that was kind of like my breakaway from D&D, and that was kind of where, like, when I, again, heavy quotes, graduated to more of the World of Darkness and more of that, I spend experience in order to progress particular areas. That was much more of my jam, if you want to call it that. And so seeing a game like yours that has so many skills to pick from, it kind of goes in that same direction.
Yeah, it's a little different than yours, but I think what makes it fun is you're not like going from being a schmo to God, It's
right.
it's like certain skills work together and you gradually build up. So you can kind of say, hey, this is what my guy is practicing. This is what he's doing on his off days when he's not out slaying dragons. He's working on his swordsmanship, or he's working on, okay, I got all cut up last adventure, so this is how I sew up wounds,
Right. Or if you're guild and you're a total scumbag, you're just learning how to screw people out of their money easier.
Exactly.
So, and that was the thing that, for you, I see it as much more of a challenge. Because like with me, it was easier to adapt to because, like I said, once I kind of came up with the algorithm of how things improve, like it worked across the board for everything, as far as like, okay, this is how you improve like your basic stats on a model. Like that was pretty much a universal across the board. So I could apply that logic to all models in the game. And then when it came time to improving god powers, I could apply that logic to all god powers in the game. So it became very easy for me to come up with the improvement system, Right. So for example, in my game, because it is much more of a war game, like it leans heavier towards the war game than an RPG. Where yours is kind of slightly different. Yours is more of a warband level RPG that has more of a multiplayer Yours kind of is like slightly on the flip side of where mine is.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it cool is, we're coming at it from a different way, but we both kind of came to a similar solution.
Yeah. So with you, I know that you had to balance out all the skills, and you had a lot, like you and I talked a lot about it before, somewhat on air, somewhat off air, that there was a lot of redundancy in the beginning. How did you go about paring down that redundancy? And at that point, so paring down the redundancy and then starting to actually balance the skills in a way that made sense.
Yeah, it was, I'm not going to lie here. It's just trial and error, right?
Yeah.
This was never intended to be a game. I didn't set out and say, hey, I'm going to market the Witchborn. I just said, hey, I've got this really cool idea for a game, and I've got all this stuff. And if I went back to the original PDF, people would laugh, about how it started. But it was a lot of trial and error, and it's very important to balance the skills in a game like the Witchborn because you don't have a game master there to be that arbitrator. So it's there's a lot of things. In my gut, I knew that, there's 3 levels of skills. There's basic, there's expert, and there's master. Master are obviously very hard to get. But I kind of threw them out there for people to try out, and I kind of put them in categories based on where I thought they fit. And then all of a sudden you notice, well, these 5 playtesters are all taking this skill as their first skill, as a basic skill. Why are they taking that as a basic skill? Well, they found a loophole. Okay, well, maybe that shouldn't be a basic skill. Maybe that should be an expert skill,
Right.
And just move it up a notch. And so it was truly because I wasn't working towards a deadline, or I wasn't trying to, it was just, to be honest, we play every Friday night with the same group of guys, and then whatever stragglers we get in. And while I was creating this game, I wouldn't even play. I would just watch them play, and we'd have 3 or 4 games going. And then the next morning I would wake up and I would just have a million notes, and I'd be like, okay, I got to change this. I got to change this. I got to change this. This isn't working. This isn't working. At some point, your playtesters become useless to you because they're getting confused on the different iterations. Yeah. So you got to go and find new people. But hopefully by that point, we're starting to get things in the right buckets, in the right categories. Yeah, that's definitely a master. Yeah, that's an expert. That's a basic. And I still probably have a couple that are still in wrong buckets. And I always tell people on Talk Witchborn and some of the other social media outlets, some people are mad, some people like it, but I'll just change something. and that becomes the official rule because I see a problem, I've got to fix it.
Right. Well, as much as some people complain about it, I don't ever see it as an issue. I mean, we are in the age of the internet. If I find that there's something wrong in Ragnarok, I can put out an FAQ within a few weeks period to where everything's typed up and explained, clarification of rules or tweaks on rules, and say, yeah, this is now in effect as the official, compared to where it was before. You would never really have that option. If you think about it, even if you look at it from a video game analog standpoint, right? So I kind of come video game wise, I come from the competitive fighting game background. So it's you look at, Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 3, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, which was still considered one of the most competitive games. And it was what are they going to do? They going to send out an internet patch to fix it? No, you played how it was. And then if they came out with a version 1.8, then you had to play that in the arcade, or, buy some turbo edition or things like that, where it's now you look at the Street Fighter series and they just, do a patch. Oh, Akuma is way too powerful, just using that as an example from the Street Fighter 2 days. It's they could just patch that.
Yeah.
So, and it's kind of the same thing, with modern war games and tabletop hybrid RPGs. It's kind of the same thing. You could just change it and say, you know what, this is based upon feedback and based upon like honest playtest. This is what the ruling is now, and some people are not going to like it. Some people are going to like it. Typically the people I find that don't like it are the ones that found a way to exploit it in the first place. And now they're going, ha 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 ha. And they're rubbing their hands together instead of just accepting it. But that's a matter of opinion.
Yeah. And I think with both of our games, we have so many moving parts that it's really easy to overlook something. It was like the other night we were playing an adventure and somebody used an earthquake spell. And it very clearly talks about what happens to people on foot. It very clearly talks about what happens to people who are riding mounts. Doesn't address vehicles in the current rules. So I've got to do an addendum because what happened to that wagon that got toppled over by the earthquake? People want to know, and it's like, well, in the 10 years that I was developing the earthquake spell, nobody ever had a wagon that was targeted by an earthquake. So,
right. So now you're like, oh, how do I deal with this thing?
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to be good for the people in the wagon.
Well, the wagon is still a great. The wagon is still a great option until someone hits it with earthquake. That's all there is to it.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, it's all little stuff like that to where I am certain at this point, just because of the fact that I've got so many crazy powers and like books 2 and 3, there's going to be at minimum 10 new powers in each book. Right. And I know that after a while, somebody's going to come up with some wombo combo wonky build that people are going to look at it and go, oh my God, broken. And I'm going to have to go back and find out, okay, where is it broken and why? And see if there is a way that it could be retconned or fixed in some way to where, people don't feel like there's only one true way to play Ragnarok. I don't ever want it to be that way. You should be able to use whatever powers you want to. But with that said too, that was probably one of the hardest things to do with the game is, you think of, in my case, like a very much like an over the top, like, Norse warriors meets Mortal Kombat meets like some heavy metal, like end times of, Yggdrasil, right? And like you automatically think of like over the top crazy combat. And while yes, the powers should kind of reflect that, at the same time, like you need to have utility powers too. And how do you balance, how do you make the utility powers feel just as important as, just the I'm going to light you on fire powers?
Right.
So that was a big challenge for me.
Yeah. And the way I did it, I think you did something similar. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of gave each skill a point value.
Yes.
And when you're updating your roster properly in the Witchborn, it's kind of luck whether you're going to get a basic skill or a master skill when you level up. But if you do have a master skill, it's going to count more against your war clan value. So
right.
A guy who cheats and rolls on his own and gives all his guys master skills, there is a penalty he's paying for that. His war clan is going to be higher valued, and I'm going to get
right.
And I think you did something similar with kind of valuing your skills, didn't you?
Yeah. So,
I know you did your weapons and your warriors and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So the way that it works is I kind of, algorithms have always been important to me just because of the fact that, and again, for those of you listening out there, I know I've kind of mentioned it before. No algorithm is ever going to be 100% perfect when you're designing a war game. It's not, but it can at least get you close enough to make things feel, I'm going to say 70% balanced off the bat. And then with feedback, you kind of, push back and forth a little bit to where you get it to where you want it. And so I kind of assigned powers to an algorithm based upon how they would be used in the game. Right. And since the game, yes, does have a lot of apply X to face mentality. At the same time, there's a lot of objective grabbing and there's a lot of, playing to the objectives as well. So the powers were kind of balanced against that. Not so much just like we're going to run at each other and make a line full of like swinging axes and shields. So there's a lot behind the thought of the algorithm on that. And so once I kind of assigned that algorithm, it allowed me to have a starting point And then throughout like playing with those abilities, people tell me, hey, you know what? This one just doesn't quite feel like it's as powerful as it should be. And, you know, in my thought on that has always been, if you're going to tell me this is too weak or too strong, you can tell me that, but you need to tell me why. Like, why did you, what is your conclusion on that? You can't just be like, this power sucks.
Yeah, it's nice. This power's open. I would never want this because I feel like this one's better, or this will get me farther, you know.
These three powers put together are far more efficient than this one.
Right.
You know, where it's like, you know, I by taking these three powers, I get all the abilities of this one without having to buy this one, plus all the stuff that's stacked with, you know, something along those lines, to where it's like you look at it and go, okay, valid point. Now I can either reduce the base cost of this skill or power, or raise it based upon if they also think that, you know, hey, this is way too overpowered, you know. And then on that scale too, you almost have to look at it and go, okay, is it just a point adjustment, or is it like, does something need to be added or taken away in order to adjust it? So it's kind of a two-step process on that, and it never comes easy.
Oh yeah. This is, you know, we've talked about it before. Playtesting is so key, because no matter how you envision it in your head, sometimes people will just read the way you wrote it down and go, I don't want that. I had that with there's this item that the guild have in my game called Wraithroot. Yeah. And if your guy is wounded, normally he's removed from the battle map for the rest of the game. But if you have Wraithroot, that buys you 4 extra turns to play.
Right.
And you can do a lot of damage in 4 extra turns, because most games are 6 to 8 turns. So you're basically buying yourself another half game.
Yeah.
And so, but the way I had originally written the way Wraithroot works was, I pointed out that you're going to suffer the first wound, but if you're wounded again, you're going to suffer that wound as well. And people are like, oh, I'm never going to take that because I'm going to get 2 wounds. And it's like, oh, you're wounded anyway. This is giving you a chance to, you know, to come back and play. So I rewrote it, and it was just the way that I spoke about it. People are like, wow, this seems really powerful. You mean my guy can be wounded and he's not out of the game? Yes, that's the whole point of it. But sometimes it's how you write the skill is almost as important as, you know, how the skill works and everything else.
Yes.
People misinterpret all the time. And as writers, we don't always see it, you know, and that's right, where that playtesting really comes in.
Yeah, and also having people, you know, good editing on the rules too. I've talked about it before. Like, luckily, I have a Robin. You know, so and the reason why I say that is because Robin is
very borrow good. Robin sometime.
Yeah, you know, Robin is very good at looking at a rule, and like I tell him, play devil's advocate. You know, with it, like, if it could be interpreted a different way, or like it doesn't quite make sense, let me know, because that's the thing is, us as the rules writers, and, you know, for you, those of you out there listening that are writing your own rules, you know, there are times where it's like, you know, in your head exactly how that rule should work. You know, exactly, like 100% how it's supposed to operate. However, did you write it down in a way that, you know, makes sense? Like, did you just vomit some stuff out on a page that makes it sound similar to what goes on in your head, or is it actually what it should be to the letter? So having somebody edit and read the rules and like let you know the interpretations will allow you to correct and fix that. And it sounds very nitpicky, and it is, but it does wonders for making sure that your finished product is exactly as you intended it to be.
I did a little post this week, and I called it Blessed Are the Game Breakers. And I talked about, you know, it's going to be a new series, like horrible mistakes in game design. And an early skill for the orcs was the armorer skill.
Yeah.
And the thing was, you know, I thought, hey, people might want to make armor after the game, and then they don't have to buy stuff, and it'd be cool. And I didn't really put a lot of restrictions on it. And one of my friends, who's also named Tim, said, well, gee, I got 10 guys. Why don't I make all 10 of them armorers? And then I'm just sitting there making armor left and right. And, before long, he has a factory going, and you're like, he's making more money after the game than he could ever make during the game because he's reselling all that armor. And you're like, wow, that really didn't work. That wasn't the way I ever intended it.
Yeah.
So now, for people who don't know, it's like you can have one master armorer and then everybody else can only be assistants. They can help him make it better, faster, whatever, but one guy is the master because that got so out of hand so quickly.
Yeah, and that's it's always stuff like that you always find. Like, my rule of thumb too is always look at every ability you have as something that can be spammed. If you look at it from that standpoint, you could start to see it's like, okay, one or two of this are good, but what about 4, 5, or 6? Like at that point, is it so ridiculously powerful that, after going through everything that you could think of, is there an answer for it? And if the answer to that is yes, there are plenty of answers for it, or like, hey, by doing this, yes, you are pigeonholing your war clan in such a way to where like they only operate in this way and they don't do any good outside of that, then, maybe it's allowed. But if it's something where it's like, oh yeah, they do this, they're amazing at it, they're really, really, really good at it, and by the way, they could pretty much ignore everything else, now you got to look at tweaking the power or the skill. So like in a case like that with the armorer, like you were saying, especially with the way the Witchborn is, where gold is king.
Yeah, because you are starved for gold from day one, and it will never change.
Right. So by doing something as simple as saying, you know what, only one master armorer and the rest are apprentices, it helps cut that back because otherwise, so, I mean, if you look at it from a standpoint like that, I could end up with a couple master armorers and say 5 to 10 games in, my gold value of my war clan would be almost double to triple everybody else's. They would all have the best gear and the best weapons possible.
Yeah. And you might get your brains beat in the game, but because you can't do anything but make armor, but so what? You're rich and you're going to overcome that. You're going to have better armor, better weapons eventually.
Well, right. And, the rough part with that is, kind of going back to that as a situation where let's say that, you do end up like losing some guys that get killed, right? They just get killed outright in the game. You're like, well, I could buy a new one. Plus, by the way, I have all of this extra gold to just buy them the best stuff off the bat.
Yeah.
So, there's definitely looking at every skill, even if it's a utilitarian skill, and see if there's an exploit or a way to make it ridiculously overpowered is an important thing to do.
Yeah. And it's great if you have a Robin or my Tim, to do that kind of stuff and look at that kind of stuff, because I am heroic fantasy, right? I want my guys to run out there and be the best swordsmen and the best archers and everything else. And I don't think about the other stuff as much. That's not my frame of reference. I could not imagine playing a 2-hour game to have an exciting role in the aftermath. It's like, I want to play that 2-hour game and I want to participate in it 100%. And I want to be racking up casualties and I want to be finding all the objectives. I don't want to be living so that I can make armor after the game. But there are players like that. You got to watch out for that as you're designing so that you're not giving somebody an unfair advantage.
Right. Oh yeah, 100%. So yeah, I mean, the balancing along the ways is super key, especially like in a game to where, now if you're making just like a game to where there is no improvements, as long as you kind of have your core mechanics down, you should be okay. Obviously there's still going to be balance issues and whatnot, but if you're designing a game to where even if one model levels up, say very similar to Frostgrave, balancing that is hyper important, and looking at everything along the way to make sure that it's as correct and as, again, I use the word balance, but there's a reason for that. You're playing against other people. You don't ever want people to feel like they just made nobody should ever feel like, because they picked X they've made a bad choice, and therefore, like, they need to regret everything they do.
You don't want a game of Risk where one person gets Australia and the other 5 get the rest of the world. You know, it's probably the classic mistake in game design of all time, but
yes,
still love the game.
Yeah, exactly. So it's little things like that, you know, people, you just have to be mindful of it more than anything else. Just be mindful about how that's being approached. With that though, like, one of the things we talked about is, obviously we talked about like leveling up skills, leveling up like attributes and abilities. Typically weapons I find to be fairly easy. If you kind of create like your kind of basic run of the mill weapons, you know, when you even have games like Ragnarok, you have a chance to get Mjolnir, right? It's ridiculously powerful. It's also extremely difficult to get. You know, when you start having things like that, I find weapons to be a little bit easier to deal with. What are your thoughts on that? Because I know, like, in the Witchborn, you know, everybody kind of starts with the same basic equipment. You know, everybody's kind of crawling up out of nothing, and then over time they get better gear.
Yeah, and I think what you've got to know is basically your math. You know, whether you're working off an algorithm or whatever. In mine, it's where D&D, it was hit points were king, right? As long as a guy had 1 million hit points, that was all you needed. In my game, in the Witchborn, it's defense. Defense actually matters. If you have a high defense score, then you're less likely to get hit. There are no hit points, so the object is not to be hit. So I kind of got, you know, this may sound boring to people who aren't game designers, but I sit here and chart things out, and I plan things out. And by a war clan of, you know, 300 point value has X amount of guys on average that are 3rd level, 2nd level, 1st level, 4th level. And I can take my skills and my weapon damage and kind of say, well, average defense at this level is this, average weapon damage is this. And so basically what I'm trying for is I want people to be able to hit about 50% of the time. And then a person who's got better than average defense or better than average skills, they're going to get hit less than 50% of the time. But I don't ever want to get it to the point where it's almost impossible to ever hit anybody. You know, the 16 defense orc is a good example. I mean, he's really, really hard to hit, but I'm creating skills along the way that are going to allow me to hit that 16 defense orc, you know, hopefully at least half or 16 defense dwarf at least half the time. So it's really a math exercise, and I love stats. I love football. I love that kind of stuff. So, you know, that's fun for me to kind of chart that out. And I think, Tim, you got a little of Z's too, because you got so many algorithms going that very impressive.
Yeah, and a lot of that, again, is just keeping everything as balanced as possible. And I know we keep going back to that, but I can't speak enough about the importance of just making games balanced, because that's one thing that's always irritated me about, you know, certain war games out there. And I'm not going to sit here and name specific ones off the bat, but I'm sure at some point we've all played war games, or even, you know, hell, I'll even go back to 4th edition D&D, where there were certain classes, if you go online right now and look, right, like they actually have people that have done all of this math and all of this work to say these classes are ranked from best to worst. And the worst ones are, you know, they're like, don't ever bother playing these. You know, they're completely worthless when it comes time to, like, you know, party building and everything else. And like, when you think about that, that's depressing.
Right.
You know, and I think about that on like a wargaming level and an RPG, level, where it's like, okay, so you're telling me that because nobody took the time to balance this army, like the one that I found to be the most aesthetically pleasing and just spent, you know, potential of hundreds of dollars to get into this game, I'm pretty much going to lose every game outside of like either the dice gods like absolutely loving me and hating my opponent, or some freak accident. where it's like point for point for point for point across the board. My army is just far more inefficient or far worse off than anything else in the game. And that's depressing. And you look at the same thing like D&D, right? Or any role-playing game for that matter, where it's like you get into this like character path and you're like, this just sounds really cool. I want to build my character this way. And then you find out that it's like point for point stat wise or point for point ability wise. Like this character concept sounds great, but just as far as game effectiveness just does not add up. And that's always one of the things that, if you want to talk about like turning people off to games, that's the way to do it. Yeah. So balance. That's why I always fall back on that.
Sitting in the corner doing nothing. Right. We had some great demos at Origins. We had one really bad demo, and luckily it was the quick start one. And one guy was playing dwarves, and one guy was playing elves, and they were right next to each other in staging areas. And the elf guy just starts. He's like, I don't care about the objectives. I'm just going to shoot you. And he just unloads, on the dwarf. And the dwarf, kind of stood there and he took it, because dwarves are pretty tough.
Yeah, they could do that.
And he sustained it. And so it's now the dwarf's turn. What does he do? He returns fire. And it's like, it's the old bringing a knife to a gunfight. It's like you don't go get into missile combat with elves. You take cover or you charge them and engage them in melee, and no shock, he lost. He's like, wow, the elves just seem way overpowered. It's like, well, you gotta at least apply a little strategy, dude. It's like, if you're going to stand in the open and have elves shoot at you, you're going to lose.
You are going to, unless, it's interpretation and like the dust storm kicks up right off the bat.
Exactly.
Only people they're going to outshoot, and again, we're talking a high level Witchborn play here, folks. So bear with us on that. There's only one war clan that is going to be able to outshoot an elf in that situation, and that's the Norn.
Yep.
Because they all have survival and they don't care about the storm.
Yep. Norn are whatever you want them to be, right? They're very vanilla, but if you want them to be the greatest missile guys, they can be. If you want them to be the greatest melee guys, they can be. So works out really well.
Yeah. So I guess the last thing to talk about as far as this goes is balancing scenarios based upon a level up system, and balancing like how people, like if a new player were to jump in with experienced players, how to balance that and how to balance scenarios to a level up style system. So for me, I know it's much easier because mine being much more on the wargaming side of it, it's like the scenario is the scenario is the scenario. That's balanced based upon what the scenario does. I don't have to worry about the difference between an 800 glory war clan or a 4,000 glory war clan. This scenario is going to operate the same every time. So that's far different than like how you have it with the Witchborn, where it's like, it's almost like the analog equivalent of saying this is a 1st through 3rd level adventure. This is a 15 through 20 level adventure.
Yeah, there's so much that goes into balancing that in a level up game. And, I'm not saying I've done it right, but I've done it like 3 or 4 ways to try and make it work. And one very simply is if you're properly tracking your equipments and your level and everything that your guy owns, every guy has a gold piece value, and that all totals up war clan value. And so I can quickly compare and say, Tim, my war clan is 250. What's yours? You say, oh, mine's 300. Oh, fantastic. Right. Yours is 50 better than mine. So that means there's this little incentive table that comes in the campaign rules, and it gives me like a a la carte menu of different things that I can buy pre-game for free with that 50-point difference. And it might be as simple as, hey, I can get some extra gold pieces to buy some equipment before the game. Or I could get healing potions because I know I'm at a little disadvantage. I've got a better chance to heal if Tim takes me to task. I could get I could make his best player miss the game. I could get shadow points to try and level somebody up before the game. And there's There's 20 options. There's 20 options that you can kind of choose from to kind of balance the game. But we don't stop there. You know, that's just like step one. That's going to help you, make you feel better. The next thing that happens is all the encounters are scaled as well. So let's say we're playing Enter Perdition, the entry-level game, and I'm really new. I'm a raw recruit, and one of the toughest encounters I could possibly get is a troll. And that troll's going to pop out and surprise me, and I'm going to probably crap my pants, you know.
I was going to say, it's going to murder you is what's going to happen.
Yeah, and it's probably going to take my whole war clan surrounding this troll to take it down, or else we'll just, just run away is another good solution sometimes too. But Tim's got that more powerful war clan. He might face 2 trolls, or he might face 3 trolls. So it's scaled that way as well. And then the adventures also give you a suggestion on what war clan value you should be before you attempt the adventure. Now, a very experienced player can bring in a newer war clan and survive because he knows a lot of the tricks. But a new player, we're not going to throw something at you that you can't handle.
Yeah. Yeah, and so one of the big things that I always hear about games, kind of reaching back to Necromortem and Mordheim, a lot of those original games like that, especially from the wargaming side of it, is that if you were a new player jumping into the game against experienced players, like you're screwed right off the bat. They've got better equipment, their war bands or their gangs or whatever terminology they're using for their faction. Like they've got it down to like the efficient levels. And so if you jump in as a new player against somebody who's got, I guess you want to call it like massive games under their belt and, more levels, regardless of what the system is, right? That like you stand no chance. So for me, like I built it into Ragnarok where there's always an average war clan value. And whenever you jump into a game, or if you are at the lower end of that average war clan value, then like you get bonuses when you play against somebody who's a higher war clan value than you. Just so that way, you're probably going to spend a couple games getting your teeth kicked in, but that also means that like you're going to get more from it. Like you're going to gain more experience from it. Where it's like that high level player, he's not gaining as much. He's maybe gaining the basics.
Right. And I think that's important. You want people to feel like they can jump in and be that raw, unexperienced player and still have a chance and still have a fair chance.
Right, and yes.
One of the things that we've done with the Witchborn is we've created co-op adventures for almost every adventure. And so actually I posted one today that was Ash Barker and Owen playing a co-op game, and they get themselves in a lot of trouble. And but if you've got one experienced player, one new player, that's a really good way, non-threatening way to teach them the basics of the game without them feeling like they're getting picked on, because the worst thing could possibly happen. We had a guy show up one time, and a bunch of the kids were teaching them how to play, and they just went, because it was one of their friends, they just went after him hardcore. They started attacking him, picking on him, everything else. Shockingly, the guy never showed up again. It's
go figure.
Yeah, it's like, guys, new players, let them win. It's like, or at least coach him. Give him advice. You can't.
Yeah, you can't just go beating him up.
Yeah, just because he's your friend doesn't mean he wants to take that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of times I look at it like that in games too, especially when you're dealing with games with a level up style mechanic, even if they are more competitive, right? Like it's all about like being the best war clan or being the best gang or, war band, again, whatever the terminology is, of being the best. It's like there still has to be this honor system in there, right? Where it's like you got to understand this is a new player. You can't just go into it kicking his teeth in, unless he really asks you to right off the bat. Like you got to give him a chance to learn the game. And like after playing a couple of sessions and whatnot, then he should be able to go in there and, be able to hold his own. So at that point, if you want to go, the kid gloves come off, at least now he's ready for it compared to, just getting his butt kicked in right off the bat. Like nobody wants that.
Yeah. Anytime you start a new game, every game's got its own mechanics. There's some things that might feel familiar to you and you're kind of overwhelmed at first,
Oh, of course.
And so it's like, and you got somebody coming at you full bore, that's just not right. Unless you're both rookies, then, go for it just to see how combat works and see what happens there. But yeah, it's use a little discretion, be a good sport.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the key things is, first, well, and that's more from a player base, but from a design aspect, balance. And then incentives, for people that jump into the game. Like people should feel good jumping into a game, even if they're going against experienced players. Now, from the experienced player standpoint, that means like, again, taking in the spirit of the game, right? Where yes, you still want to be the best, but you also want to welcome new players in so that way they keep playing with you. That's, I guess it's kind of an approach from both sides on that where, again, design standpoint, balance is king. From a game organizer, tournament organizer standpoint, inclusivity and an inviting atmosphere is where you're going to win out with that.
Yeah. And I think, there's the nice thing about it is in your game, my game, there's a lot of different scenarios too that put you in different situations. If you're starting off in Enter Perdition, you don't even have to fight in that game if you don't want to. No. It's a big, wide open map, and if you want to hang out on the edge and make discoveries and go after the objectives, unless somebody's coming at you full bore, you can avoid combat pretty easily, And then you get into Asylum, which is like the second adventure. That's a bar brawl. That one's going to teach you about melee, and so you don't want to be the 100-point war clan versus the 500-point war clan in that. You want to be more balanced. So you talk them into playing Enter Perdition and give you a chance to catch up. But that's another thing to think about.
Yeah, and and then you start reaching into the other adventures. So like you've got three, like for yours, an example, you have 3 off the bat that people can play. There's obviously Enter Perdition, which is kind of the learning game. So they don't have to fight if they don't choose. Asylum, they're pretty much going to be in a fight. Like at some point, somebody somewhere is going to screw up and there's going to be a fight. And then you've got Dragon Moon, where again, they don't necessarily have to fight. Like if they can sit back with just strong tactics and win Dragon Moon. Right. Obviously there's some luck, but Dragon Moon's another one to where if they don't want to fight, they don't have to fight.
Yeah. And what I always tell people is Enter Perdition is learning how to move and basic mechanics. Asylum is learning how to fight. And Dragon Moon it just happens to be like the best 4 to 6 player team game there is. And so that's kind of learning how to play a co-op game. It's just a lot. It's okay as a 2-player game. As a 4-player game, it's incredible. As a 6-player game, it's just so much fun.
Right. Yeah, and it's it comes down to the flavor you're trying to design into your game. So you and I are approaching things from a very similar standpoint, but also very different. Where in Ragnarok, if people choose to team up, it's because they want to, where with some of the stuff that you built in Enter Perdition, you're building it specifically for them to team up. Ragnarok is completely optional. You can be as honorable as possible and drop that honor at any time and just become the world's biggest jerk.
Superhero element, which is so cool.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can be as honorable as you want until you start pulling low-key skills and, combining them with Odin's travel abilities. But that's neither here nor there. I can't ruin too much. The game's not out yet. But, so, Cory, is there anything else you kind of want to throw in there? I feel like we really touched upon the importance of, like, game balance. And, like, hopefully, like, we've expressed enough throughout talking during this episode to the listeners out there. Again, like, we really want feedback on this. Like, hopefully this wasn't discouraging to anybody about creating a level up style game, but hopefully they realize that it's not as easy as just writing some stuff down and saying, yes, we're done.
Yeah. It's really, you've seen this too. It's a learning process for the game creator. There is no way the first thing you're putting down on paper is going to work 100% of the time, because that's the cool thing about it, right? You've got so many different players with so many different ideas. They think differently than you do, and they're going to push and they're going to nudge. And I think I could write all my skill descriptions in 2 lines, and everything else is just restrictions. No, you can't do this. You can't do this. And it's because there are so many people that are coming at it from a different way, and there's the analytical people, there's the creative people. They're coming at it from different ways.
Yeah, very much so. Awesome. So again, folks, I can't put out anything upon Ragnarok just yet. However, I can say if you go onto Facebook and look up Ragnarok Worldwide, you can actually get in there now and start joining the discussion. Yes. Cory, again, where can everybody reach you for the Witchborn?
Witchborn.com is a great place to start, and click that first link, the first picture up there. It's going to take you and let some other guys describe how the game is played and how it works. They do it better than I do. So
that does happen.
Yeah, it does happen. Sometimes you get too close,
Excellent. Well, folks, that's going to wrap up this episode of Skirmish Supremacy. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening to another episode of Skirmish Supremacy. To see more of the antics that Nick and I do, you can check us out on Facebook at Skirmish Supremacy. We also have Twitter, which we can be reached at Skirmish Supreme, because apparently Skirmish Supremacy does not fit in Twitter. And if you want to email us directly, you can reach us at tim@skirmishsupremacy.com or nick@skirmishsupremacy.com. Thanks for listening.